we thank you for coming out, because the more people that come out to these things, the more we can try to make these kind of events happen. So, John, today is part two.
Today is part one of Shakespearean Sonnets.
Part one of Shakespearean Sonnets.
So next Saturday will be part two.
Next one. Okay. Well, excellent. Well, welcome you likewise.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming out on this lovely day. Today we are going to look at Shakespearean sonnets. The sonnet as a form was established by Petrarch in the 1300s in Italy. And in June, we will be studying the Petrarchan sonnet, which is maybe a little bit harder to write. It has a little more flexibility than the Shakespearean sonnet. But today, let's see, does everybody have a sheet? Okay, good. Today we're going to be looking at the Shakespearean sonnet. And as an introduction, I'm going to read some Shakespearean sonnets, just to give you a flavor. So we'll start with the hard bard himself, and this should be a poem that most of you have probably heard before. He wrote about 150 sonnets, separate from his plays, although there are 5 or 6 sonnets embedded in his plays that aren't in this book. But this is sonnet number 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So, love sonnet. Most of his sonnets are love sonnets. Got another one. This is one that I especially liked when I was reading all of these a couple of years ago. This one's along the same themes, but specifically about time. Devouring time, blunt thou the lion's paws, and make the earth devour her own sweet brood. Pluck the keen teeth from the fierce tiger's jaws, and burn the long-lived phoenix in her blood. Make glad and sorry seasons as thou fleets, and do whate'er thou wilt, swift-footed time, to the wide world and all her fading sweets. But I forbid thee one most heinous crime. O carve not with thy hours my love's fair brow, nor draw no lines here with thine antique pen. Him in thy course untainted do allow for beauty's pattern to succeeding men. Yet do thy worst, old time, despite thy wrong. My love shall in my verse ever live young. So, 2 Shakespearean sonnets by Shakespeare himself, who I believe stuck to that form pretty consistently. You can see on the handout that I gave you, we'll be getting into this in a couple of minutes, but the poem is lined up in metrical stresses and stressed and unstressed syllables, and then the rhyme scheme. So A is a sound, B is a sound, and then A is the same sound as A, and so forth. So I'll explain it in more detail, but as you're looking at it and listening, you can maybe notice that we are following that form. So this sonnet is by John Keats. Keats actually wrote a number of Petrarchan sonnets, but this is a Shakespearean sonnet. Maybe you have heard it before. It was written in 1817. When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high-piloted books in charactery hold like rich garners the full-ripened grain, when I behold upon the night's starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and think that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance, and when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love, then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink. And that was so that's 19th century. A lot of sonnets were written in the 1590s. Petrarch, like I said, was in the 1300s, and he established the sonnet as a love poem form. He was writing mostly to a woman named Laura, unrequited love. He wrote about 350 sonnets in his lifetime, and they're very interesting. I thought it would be boring reading unrequited love, but he made them interesting. So I have one more sonnet from a major poet of the late 1500s. This was a sonnet sequence called Astrophel and Stella, and it's love poems to this muse of his whom he named Stella. I doubt that was her real name, but I'm going to read one of these for you, which I find interesting. When nature made her chief work, Stella's eyes, in color black, why wrapped she beams so bright? Would she in beauty black, like painter-wise, frame daintiest luster mixed of shades and light? Or did she else that sober hue devise, in object best to knit and strength our sight, lest if no veil these brave gleams did disguise, they sunlight should more dazzle than delight? Or would she her miraculous power show, that whereas black seems beauty's contrary, she even in black doth make all beauties flow? Both so and thus, she, minding love should be placed ever there, gave him this mourning weed to honor all their deaths, for who for her bleed. So that's my introduction to the Shakespearean sonnet, and you know, it was even so. Edna St. Vincent Millay was writing sonnets in the 1920s, and she died in 1950. So sonnets still had power then, and people still write sonnets today. I've been able to get some of my sonnets published, and but you know, with after World War I, and Walt Whitman started this in the 1850s. Is, you know, prior to Whitman, English poetry was metered and rhymed. And then he started breaking away from that, although he did not write exclusively without rhyme and meter. And then after World War I, 1919, 20, we have what's called the modern poetry movement, where which started to set aside, to move away from rhyme and meter and to think more about content, imagery, ideas. The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot was an important work at that time. Ezra Pound had a hand in a lot of what was going on. Imagism was one of the things. It was, if you know what a haiku is, you know, you're trying to capture just an image of beauty. often related to the seasons in just, I don't know, 20 syllables or so. And so that concept had an influence on Western poetry, and like I said, the Imagist movement was born in 1919, 1920 or so. Amy Lowell was one of the major poets of that movement. Now, to write a Shakespearean sonnet, you need rhyme and meter. The meter is typically iambic pentameter. Now, what is iambic pentameter, you may ask? So, an iamb is one metrical foot. 2 syllables, it goes da-da. An iambic pentameter is a line of 5 iambic feet. So, da-da, 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 5 times. Another way that my girlfriend suggested to me, she used to teach iambic pentameter in a class, and she said, think of it as your foot, the da, and then your toe, the da, and da da, da da, da da. And that helps you to remember that it's a foot, an iambic foot. So what I want you to look at the handout, and I'll read this slowly. Now the first line, so I said it needs to be iambic pentameter. Well, sometimes poets break the rules a little bit, and I did a couple of times in this poem. Instead of having a full iambic foot to start with, I just have the second stressed syllable and then the rest of the line. So that's why the first line starts with a stressed syllable rather than an unstressed syllable. So, sunk into the water of the night, my starry hopes caught in the undertow, swirling mid the bubbles in delight, and dazzled by the oceanic glow of starfish and anemones in blue, who dance among the current seeking prey, my vain desires taking on the hue of all the dreaming denizens held sway by moonstruck hopes and broken tidal wars that flay the ocean floor with black back and forth, currents grinding shells onto the shores, and I collect the dregs of tidal birth, clawing at the grains of sand in brine, these pitted shards and pearly dross are mine. So hopefully you were able to see and hear the stresses as I was reading it very slowly. Now I'll try reading the same poem without trying to stress, the feet. Sunk into the water of the night, my starry hopes caught in the undertow, swirling mid the bubbles in delight, and dazzled by the oceanic glow of starfish and anemones in blue, who dance among the currents seeking prey, my vain desires taking on the hue of all the dreaming denizens held sway by moonstruck hopes and broken tidal wars that flay the ocean floor with back and forth currents, grinding shells onto the shores, and I collect the dregs of tidal birth, clawing at the grains of sand in brine. These pitted shards and pearly dross are mine. And the Shakespearean sonnet consists of 3 quatrains, which is to say 3 groups of 4 lines. So, and then a rhymed couplet at the end. So, which is to say 2 lines that rhyme where the last sound rhymes with each other. So, night is A, toe is B, delight is A, glow is B. That's the first quatrain. And then blue is C, pray is D, hue is C, sway is D, wars is E, forth is F, shores is E, birth is F, and then brine and mine. Now, when I first started writing sonnets, I was very careful to make, as close as I could, perfect rhymes. As you get used to what perfect rhymes are, and especially if you're writing a Petrarchan sonnet, which requires more, you have to have 4 sounds that rhyme, and 4 sounds again that rhyme to get the first 8 lines. So writing a Shakespearean sonnet follows this format. Often, you'll try to put an idea in the first 8 lines, and then, some kind of an answer to that idea in the next 6 lines. I don't always try to do that, but what you write has to make some kind of sense to you. So let's, do any of you think you can come up with a line of iambic pentameter and see what it sounds like?
I got one.
All right.
I hope I don't regret these words I write.
I hope I don't regret these words I write. Perfect. Anybody else want to give it a try? All right, let's hear it.
I thought I might be hungry for some food. I'm not sure what the mood. Then I thought, how about some fish for my main dish?
Okay, I thought I might be hungry for some food. That is iambic pentameter. But and I congratulate you trying to move on to the next line. But the next 2 lines were not 5 feet. They did rhyme, which is the idea. We want them to rhyme. So that is not how a sonnet is structured. It is how a lyrical poem is structured. So you got that. So, all right, do you have an idea?
Yeah, well, the one that came to mind is something like, I went out the door to go to the store.
Okay, that's actually, and this is what's confusing when you're trying to write iambic pentameter, is sometimes the syllables don't, I went, and then it's out the,
Door.
and then door is stressed. So you've got 2 unstressed syllables
Okay, I see.
before the stressed syllable. So that is not actually iambic pentameter. And it's hard. When I remember when I was first writing, I was like, is that iambic pentameter? And you try to convince yourself that it is. And then later you look at it and say, that's not iambic pentameter.
But if you say as if you're trying to communicate to somebody, and you're talking where you normally would talk to another person, then it becomes clear what syllables are stressed.
Yeah.
If you write it out, you can often, like John said, fool yourself. But
Yeah.
if you say it out loud as if you're talking to somebody, it usually falls in place.
When you hit a word that's hard to rhyme, you either think, after you have some experience, you realize this word is going to be hard to rhyme much with. And but what I have learned is, aside from rewriting the sentence so that it uses a different word at the end, I use, there's something called Rhyme Zone. There's a website called Rhyme Zone on the internet. If you just search like Quay space rhyming words, and it'll give you a bunch of links. And I usually choose Rhyme Zone. And it will show you like all these, a lot of them are words you've never heard of. They're from Old English or whatever. But there are a lot of words that you do know. And it's very useful when you're trying to write is to get, sometimes it'll spark your mind for a new idea. To me, one of the joys of writing in a formal form like this is that, you know, there are constraints. And so usually when I'm writing a sonnet, I'll have a line that I like, and I'll say, well, that's interesting. And then, but I don't have the whole poem put together in my head. I just start, well, what's a good second line? And, you know, so by that time, if I'm writing a Shakespearean sonnet, I have the two sounds for the first 4 lines. And then I can think, and a lot of times I'll write the first line and think about it, and you know, maybe 20 minutes later I write the second line. And then, you know, it's just, it develops into something as you write it. You know, you're kind of looking inside yourself, you know, what's there, what's interesting, what goes with this. And when I write, I usually try to write something that's that comes at the truth from a, you know, not so direct, but maybe an indirect statement without using, I try to say things in a unique way, or to say something that's unusual, or an observation that you don't hear every day. But, you know, when you're just starting, it's fun to just do the form. It's like, I wrote a sonnet. And, you know, it's like, well, maybe it could be more interesting, but it is a sonnet. And now that I've written one sonnet, I can write another one. So, have you got a second line?
Sort of. Yeah, I was thinking of, we're going to California where we
Okay.
for a long time. That's in a few days. So I'll read the first one again.
Okay.
The second one. I hope to go to see a place I've missed. The West is full of places full of bliss.
Okay, well, so the trouble for this is that you've got a couplet already, and you need a second sound. So you could maybe make that line your third line, since it rhymes with the first one, but you need a second line that uses a different rhyme sound. Okay, but it's a good start. It's a good start, and you know this is all new, so why not? I mean, the couplet is you know, I mean, as you're feeling things out, it's like, yeah, well, that makes sense. And if you were doing a Petrarchan sonnet, then you've got a lot of couplets, but that's for June. That's for June. Does anybody else have a first line or a second line to follow a first line? Go ahead.
I sing a song I hope will sound like spring.
Say it again.
I sing a song I hope to sound like spring.
That is iambic pentameter.
Are you not stressed correctly?
No. I sing a song I hope to sound like spring. It's right.
Okay.
It is iambic pentameter. So, and it's interesting. So that's a good start. Now you can start thinking about a second line to go with it, but you need a different sound for the last word or sound in the line. So I sing a song I hope to sound like spring. And that's actually an interesting, because the hope is stressed more than the other stressed syllables. which makes the line a little more complex and a little more interesting. So it's a good start.
I think I got one.
Okay, David.
I hope I don't regret these words I write, because regret can fester into pain today, and thus extend them into night. Then I will lose all that I would gain.
That's good. That's a quatrain. You've got your first quatrain. Well, it's a start. It's something, and poems don't always mean something. Sometimes they're just expressing something, and a part of your experience. Sometimes I'll just be running through my day and I'll get an idea for a line. It happens to be iambic pentameter, and I'll think about it and I'll say, oh, that might be a good start for a poem, and then I'll write it down, and then I'll think about what might come next. Other times, though, I just get a word or a phrase. Like one day I got the idea of Jasper Bones, and I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder what kind of a poem I could make out of that idea. And then I wrote a poem which I called Noah's Bones. And I actually got that published, which is nice when you can get things published. But what I was referring to with her is more the complexity of the meter in the line that she came up with, which for me isn't usually keyed into a particular word. It's just, how the idea comes out of me. And then it's like, oh, I like that sound. I wonder what I can make to go with it. So, I mean, for me, poetry is sort of probing your unconscious, probing your memories. And a lot of times I develop the idea for a poem as I'm looking at Rhyme Zone, and it's like all these words. It's like, oh, I didn't think of that one. I could do something with that word. And so based on the rhyme, it helps to actually write the poem. And so that that's another example of how the constraints of the form help me to actually write. Yes, David.
You can also, I use the technique where I go through the alphabet. So if I'm looking for main, I might go brain, cane, drain, refrain, grain. Just going through the alphabet and saying the rhyming word and seeing if it triggers a real word.
With Rhyme Zone, they start off with one-syllable words that rhyme, then two-syllable words that rhyme, and then three-syllable words that rhyme, as far as up to like 4 or 5 syllable words that rhyme with whatever word you click in. And then, and this is where you can get fancy, is if you're having a hard time, you go for a near rhyme.
I've noticed some poets, they try to rhyme a word that is spelled the same, even though it doesn't actually sound the same.
That is called an I rhyme.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at it, it looks like a rhyme.
Right, it really doesn't.
But even though, like food and blood have different sounds, but you might rhyme them anyway in your poem because they both end with OOD.
Yeah.
Move and love are similar in that. And yeah, you can get away with using move and love. I don't know how those words are pronounced in 1595.
Good point.
And I've seen them rhymed before in some of these older poems.
Yeah.
So you're looking at it and you say, well, yeah, that kind of rhymes. And then another thing, with like 19th century and before, is they often would take moved, and it would be moved. They'll make the ed its own syllable, and and then if they didn't want it to be, it would be MOV apostrophe D, and then you wouldn't say moved, but nowadays, editors don't like those archaic forms, and so but you can still do it if you feel like it. I've read so much poetry from the 1590s that it's very comfortable for me to use some of those archaic forms, and it's actually been an effort for me to move past them. So
I imagine with dialect, that's an issue, tomato.
yeah. So there's always a little bit of wiggle room in there, because how is it actually going to be pronounced, or how did you mean for it to be pronounced, and that sort of thing. So, but the form helps you to discern. Oh well, he probably meant it to he probably meant it to rhyme like this, to sound like this. You got something?
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
I was hungry for some food. I was not sure what I wished for my dish. For a while I stood, what might be my mood. Finally I thought I must have fish for my dish.
You're getting the rhyming, you're working on it, you're certainly making progress. Can I see it? Okay, this seems to be written. You originally had iambic pentameter in this first line, but then you took out thought I might and replaced it with was.
Right.
So I was hungry for some food. That's tetrameter, which is a valid form for a sonnet. You can write it in tetrameter. I've written tetrameter sonnets before. So, but then you just need to be consistent. So I was hungry for some food. I was hungry for some food. I was not sure what I wished. I wished for my dish. For a while, This is interesting, and it does rhyme, but it is...
Get a little Dr. Seuss in there.
yeah, it does have a little Dr. Seuss in there. You've got what's called internal rhymes, which means you've got a rhyme inside the line that rhymes with the end of the... So wish for my dish is an internal rhyme. You've got wish rhyming with dish on the same line. So that's good. You're right. It's very Dr. Seuss, and it's certainly poetry, and it's interesting. But sometimes, and this happens to me sometimes. I'm thinking and I'm trying to come up with iambic pentameter. It's like everything I write down is like not iambic pentameter. What do I do now? And then you take a break, and that's what I do usually because what was interesting for me after I spent hours and hours, I have a whole book called the Book of Sonnet Sequences. It's about 300 pages long, and it's got a whole... William Wordsworth wrote a sonnet sequence on the River Duddon. Edna St. Vincent Millay wrote a sonnet sequence of about 50 sonnets called Fatal Interview. John Donne wrote 19 sonnets in a sequence called Holy Sonnets. I mentioned Aphrodite and Stella. That was 102 sonnets, I think, with some extra poems thrown in for good measure. So after I had read so many sonnets and I had the iambic pentameter, kind of seared into my brain, I picked up a book I don't know if you've heard of Keats' sonnet. I'm first looking into Chapman's Homer. Maybe you studied in the school. Anyway, he was. So I liked that sonnet, and I thought, wow, well, if this was such a great book for John Keats, what would it be like? And you know, you try and you go on Amazon and you look for Chapman's Homer. What Chapman's Homer was the Iliad and the Odyssey, written in Elizabethan England. It was the first English translation of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I'm not sure exactly what rules of poetry Homer was using when he wrote it in 800 BC, but I had tried. Because I was interested in it, I had bought a copy on eBay for $40. There was one copy on eBay, and it was in Australia, and so I got it and I started reading it. It's like, I don't understand this. This doesn't make much sense. But then a couple of years ago, I went back to it and I started reading it, and I said, "Oh, this is rhymed metered verse. This is, it wasn't iambic pentameter. It was called heroic couplets, which is, instead of 5 iambic feet, it was I think 8, and so it was longer than iambic pentameter. But I had read so much iambic pentameter that it just jumped right out to me. Oh wow, I see how this was written." And what had confused me before was he uses all kinds of names for the Greek heroes and gods, and I was just confused. But then I looked at the glossary at the front, and it's like, oh, Acetus means Achilles. Oh, okay. So I finally did sit down and I read the whole thing. The Odyssey was written in heroic couplets, and then the Iliad was written in heroic couplets, and then the Odyssey was written in iambic couplets. So he chose to make the line shorter for the Odyssey, but it was very interesting, and so it's kind of fun. The more you read sonnets, the more it becomes like it's like a heartbeat inside you. You just feel it, and that makes it easier to write like that. For a while, I was writing almost exclusively sonnets, and that was fun. And then my girlfriend challenged me. She said, she's a poet too, and she said, "I challenge you to write something that's not a sonnet in free verse." And I did, and she liked it, and then I just started writing more free verse, and I ended up writing a lot like that. But then I still went back to sonnets, so I can do both. But it is interesting, and this was written, probably 3 years ago, maybe 4. I think I do not, what I remember about this poem was, I probably just got that initial line came to me, and I said, "Sunk into the water of the night," and then I probably built it from that. My original composition of this, the last 2 lines were very different, and I had put it, so the way I like to write is I compose on my phone, and then I email what I consider to be a completed version to my computer, and then I put it into a Word document, and then I save it in a folder. And then what I do is maybe every month or so I'll go in and I'll start at the bottom of the folder, the oldest poems, and then I'll look at them and I'll say, well, I like this, or well, this could, and then I try and revise them to see if I can make them better. Revision is an important part of writing poetry, or it can be. So it was interesting. This particular poem I submitted to a poetry journal called The Lyric, which is the longest continuously running journal of formal verse in North America. They've been going over 100 years. And the two editors are sisters. One of them lives in Italy part of the time. And their father had been the editor of the lyric before them. I guess he's passed away. So I submitted this, and it took, I don't know, 6 or 8 months for them to get back to me. And it came back, and you know, she sent me and this was snail mail. They only accept submissions by snail, U.S. Postal Service, only, which makes it more challenging to submit to. But it came back with, a form rejection slip. It was a typed rejection slip, but then on the back it said, we took some interest in this poem, but the last 2 lines are weak. And which was interesting because like the month before I had been revising and I had changed the last 2 lines to something else because I had thought myself, these 2 lines are weak. And so after she sent that back, I said, well, this is like asking me to submit again with an improved last 2 lines. So I took a day or 2 thinking, what can be the best 2 lines that I come up with for this? And finally I came up with these 2 lines that you see here. Clawing at the grains of sand and brine, these pitted shards and pearly dross are mine. And she liked them, and she accepted it for publication. Yes?
What were the previous 2 lines?
Well, it was something about this sinking, bleeding ocean is mine. And she said, well, I don't see how an ocean can bleed. And I was like, well, yeah. And that's kind of what I had seen, how does the ocean sink? And so I had decided that I didn't like the original 2 lines the same way she had, I suppose. So, but what was very special about this poem was about 8 months after I submitted it, and she had accepted it, and it had been published, I got a letter in the mail that had a check in it, and I was like, well, what's this? And then I took out the slip, and it said, you have won the 2022 Quarterly Award, which meant that this was considered to be the best poem in that particular issue because it's released, the Winter Quarterly Award. So they publish every season, so 4 issues a year.
You didn't even know you had applied for that and you won it.
Well, I didn't know I was. I thought, well, because I also had subscribed. And I thought, well, maybe they've gone out of business, and this is a refund on the rest of my subscription, And I'm looking at it. You won? How could I have won? It was very nice to have that honor. Yes.
There's an example of a near rhyme in your poem. They afraid the ocean floor was back and forth. I collect the dregs of tidal birth.
Yes, that is a near rhyme. You're right. Yeah. The goal for next week is to complete a sonnet or 2, come back, and then we'll go over them and read them aloud. Whoever wants, you can read it yourself, or I can read it, or whatever. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish. You get enough information this time that you can go home and write something, and then come back next Saturday, and then we'll read them aloud and we'll talk about them, and we'll say, well, is this a sonnet, is it not a sonnet, or that's a really good sonnet, and here's what I liked about it, that kind of thing. All right, so that's everybody's assignment. You have the keys to writing a Shakespearean sonnet. Take it home, do what you feel like, and can I have that back? Thanks. And please come back and share your creativity with all of us. And I look forward to seeing what you all come up with. So thank you very much.